Hello from Ohio and welcome. It's spooky season, which got me thinking about what I could make with my 3D printer here. What I came up with is a skull wreath with electronic eyes. When you get too close to the wreath, the eyes change into dragon eyes. Let's learn how to make it, this time on Just Making It with Josh. One of the first electronic projects I made on my own was this haunted candy bowl. I had very little experience designing anything on my own, and it could have gone better. But it used these little screens to display eyes that looked around from this Uncanny Eyes project I found online. This year, I've got a better idea of what I'm doing. So I created a 3D printed skull and put the small 1.44-inch TFT screens in the skull. Then I used an ultrasonic distance sensor to determine how close someone was to the wreath. A modified version of the Uncanny Eyes project that changed eye types meant I could change the eyes when someone came too close. The end result is something I kind of like. Let's get started. We're going to need a few things to build this. First, I printed the skull out of PLA. Where I'm putting my skull, it's never going to experience direct sunlight. The temperatures are cool enough that I don't need to worry about that PLA melting or deforming. Now you may want to use ABS or PETG though if you have harsher conditions for your skull. Powering the project is a Teensy 4.1, though you could use a 3.6 if you wanted to. In fact, that's what the original program was designed to use. To check the distance, I used an HC-SR04 ultrasonic distance sensor. It sends out a signal and uses math to figure out how far something is away based on how long it takes for the signal to bounce back and forth. For the eyes, I used a 1.44-inch TFT screens that I got from Adafruit. The back of the skull is designed specifically to accommodate these screens. The power needs to be supplied by a 5-volt DC power adapter. I had simply used a barrel connector to accept the power supply. We'll need a couple of resistors for this project as well. The ultrasonic distance sensor outputs a 5-volt signal, but the Teensy's pens are not 5-volt tolerant. Thus, we need to use a voltage bridge divider to reduce that voltage. 2 1K ohm resistors will work, or you can mix and match if you want. Just be sure not to pass more than 3.3 volts to the pens, and don't use resistors that are too large and have too much impedance. Other than that, we'll just need a bunch of wires, soldering gear, heat shrink tubing, some hot glue, the normal stuff. Now on the software side, we'll need a slicer to slice and print the skull. I use Cura for this, but you use whatever you prefer and like. You'll also need the Arduino IDE with Teensy Duino installed. This is needed to flash the eye programming to that Teensy microcontroller. I put links to all these in the description below. Just follow the setup instructions, especially if you don't have that Teensy Duino already installed. Please note that none of the products mentioned in this video have sponsored any portion of this video. The skull itself is just one piece that I 3D printed. I designed the entire thing in Blender, and as you can see, the inside includes places specifically designed for those screens to attach to ensure that they are straight up and down and looking properly outside the skull. And when it comes to printing the skull, I printed it face up with Cura's tree supports, as you'll see. Next, we'll need to program the Teensy. I started with the Uncanny Eyes project and code I found online, and I modified it. The original code only lets you have one eye type. I modified the code to allow me to have 2 different eye types on demand. Additionally, I added the ability to change that eye type based on whether the distance sensor detected an object closer than a preset mount. To get started, open the Arduino IDE and then open the project that I created. I would start by trying to compile the program. It's possible you'll be missing a needed library. If that's the case, open up the Arduino Library Manager and search for the missing libraries. It's important that these are installed because without them, this project will never work. In fact, compiling it will let you know whether you have all the needed libraries. The default trigger distance in the program is 110 centimeters. The sensor I used could go up to 4 meters, but where I was using it, 110 centimeters was the right amount. You can change the distance to meet your needs by modifying line 28 in the config.h file. I'd recommend that you not mess with any of the other parts of the programming unless you know what you're doing. Once things are programmed, assembly is relatively straightforward. But do pay careful attention to the wiring diagram. Each pin is set, and if you make variations, it won't work unless you modify the underlying code. Now, a PDF version of the wiring diagram is found in the links below. First, you're going to want to cut several lead wires and connect them to the relevant pins on the screens. You can see from the wiring diagram which pins on those screens you're going to need to use. I then connected those wires together with the exception of the TFT CS pins. At the connection points, I added another lead wire that would then go to the teensy, and I covered those connections with some heat shrink tubing. I then connected those wires to the relevant pins on the teensy as set out in the wiring diagram. Next, I wired the distance sensor up along with the barrel connector for the power jack. Now, just place the screens in their slots, making sure to put each eye on the proper side based on that wiring diagram. I used hot glue on the corners to connect the screens to the plastic pins to hold everything in place. I also hot glued the barrel connector to the side of the skull on the inside. The teensy itself just hangs loosely inside the skull. And the distance sensor, it should hang out below the bottom of the teeth. Glue the assembly to the grapevine wreath, make sure the wreath doesn't get too close to the distance sensor, plug it in, and test it out. This was a fun project. I found that making the skull in Blender was a new challenge, and I really enjoyed the challenge of modifying the code from the Uncanny Eyes project to accept multiple eye types. And using that distance sensor was something new for me. I've never used one of those before, and I'm already starting to think about what I might do with those things next. I hope you'll give this neat skull decoration a try. And if you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.